Hey guys, what is up and welcome to a new League of Legends video. So it's been a couple of months since I've updated my top 5 assassin list and I felt like it's definitely time to do that. There's been a fair number of changes happening around with assassins recently, with some of them getting buffed and some of them getting nerfed. So with all of that said guys, remember that this list is a mix of my personal opinions combined with statistical information that I find. The question of this video is, which assassin champion would you remove from League of Legends? And if you end up enjoying this video, make sure to hit that like button. So starting things off in the number 5 spot is going to be Yasuo. A lot of you guys know that I really like to include Yasuo in these lists because in my opinion he plays similar to how an assassin does. Once he gets 100% crit, especially if he's ahead, he's gonna be pretty much 3-shotting the squishies, which is about as fast as any other assassin for the most part. But either way, Yasuo, I was a little bit concerned of putting him in the number 5 spot because at the end of the day he is somewhat of a gimmicky champion. But as of recently, I have to say he's been getting a little more consistent. So first off, Shiv has been buffed a few patches ago, which is obviously a pretty good item on Yasuo. But Warlords and Grasp of the Undying, especially with the Warlords change, are both exceptionally strong masteries or keystones on him. I did make a video talking about which one to take and when, so I do recommend checking that out. But the new Warlords is fantastic on him. He can be played top lane as well as of course mid lane. But he also has a somewhat new build path that's getting very popular, which is going Phantom Dancer into either Infinity Edge or Triforce. This is what makes Yasuo, in my opinion, a bit more consistent. This build path is quite good, it gives him a lot of what he needs, and he overall just feels like a strong champion. So those are the main reasons why I did decide to include him. But other than that, I mean, he's still Yasuo. He still has the wind wall, still has AoE knockup, and if you play him extremely well, he has a very strong laning phase, but that takes a lot of practice. The cons of this champion, however, is he still does feel gimmicky at times, though a lot more consistent than before. There's many bugs with his ultimate and Q, which can be very annoying. And like I said, if you're not very experienced with this champion, his laning phase is somewhat difficult. But other than that, I'm glad to finally be putting the Samurai back in this list. And here are my recommended runes, items, and overall the build when playing Yasuo. But moving along to the number 4 spot, I decided to put Fizz. Personally, whenever I face Fizz, I'm instant tilted because I absolutely hate facing this champion. But on top of that, I mean, he hasn't really been changed for a while. He hasn't really got any buffs, any nerfs. He hasn't even really got any indirect buffs or nerfs. He's just been Fizz for such a long time. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that he's gonna be staying relatively in the same spot every time I make these lists until either he gets buffed, nerfed, or every other assassin champion happens to get buffed or nerfed quite heavily. But again, that's not necessarily a bad thing because him still being Fizz is still very scary. He still has a ridiculous amount of damage. He still brings in an insane amount of burst damage at level 6 and the all-in potential. And without question, his E ability has got to be one of the most annoying abilities in the game, and the fact that it's on an assassin makes it even better. His damage is not very difficult to pull off because all you have to do is just turn on your W, auto attack, Q the target, or just Q them to begin with. It'll proc the Q damage, the W damage, and the Lich Bane damage. Maybe even Luden's Echo if you decided to go just completely ham in that game. And that in itself is already enough to make people very terrified. But if you end up throwing your ultimate on them as well just before you Q on them, well, you can just essentially multiply that damage. Thunderlords is still fantastic on him. It's easy to proc. I mean, if you go 40% or even 45% CDR, especially with Zhonya's, you are going to be almost unkillable because you have so much invincibility. All in all, I don't think Fizz needs a lot of explanation as to why he's still in this list. However, the cons is the fact that his laning phase is still somewhat poor. He doesn't offer any wave clear if the enemy team is pushing to your tower, and he doesn't have any poke in his skid, which in certain situations can be quite bad. But here are the recommended runes, items, and overall the build whenever you play Fizz. Moving along to the number 3 spot is going to be Talon. Here's a champion I feel like a lot of people were wondering where I might put him in this list, but he's still quite high up, sitting in the number 3 spot. So as I'm sure most of you know, Talon did receive some nerfs quite recently. His ultimate now has not only more mana to use, but it also has a fairly longer cooldown, especially at the lower ranks. So what does that mean for Talon? Well, he's gonna have a little bit of a more difficult time when it comes to snowballing. So if you get your first kill, let's say at level 6, you go back to base, you buy your items, you come back into lane, you aren't gonna be able to just jump on on that target again and kill them, you're gonna have to wait it out by a bit more. But having said that, that's still not the biggest thing in the world because his damage is completely untouched. He can still burst his targets very easily. He still provides that heavy AoE in teamfights. He can still slow targets down with his W and his E. And as of this patch, T-Mag got returned back to where it cleaves per auto attack now, so that's obviously quite good for Talon. His Q still resets his auto attacks, it still works on towers, going for Youmu's and maybe even Duskblade with the armor penetration on him can be very deadly in the early to mid game. For the most part, Talon is still Talon. He still has the damage and he still brings everything he did before, just not as frequently in the lower ranks. Now the negatives of this assassin champion is his laning phase is still a little bit subpar, but of course at level 6 it kind of turns around. He's definitely going to be a little bit more difficult to snowball with due to the longer ultimate cooldown, but I still don't think it's the biggest thing in the world because his damage and his playstyle is still very much there. And a lot of people don't know this, but throwing down a pink in a teamfight will counter Talon's all-in, so it could be very annoying for Talon. But either way, here are the runes, the masteries, and the builds when playing this assassin champion. Moving our way into the number 2 spot is going to be a champion I don't think I've mentioned in any of my top 5 assassin lists for a very long time. And it's going to be none other than Katarina. So as I'm sure you guys know, especially if you've watched my Katarina video a couple of weeks ago, she did get buffed to her Q. Personally, I think this is quite a decent buff because the biggest issue Katarina had is not only being relatively useless in teamfights until she maybe finds the opportunity to go in, but her laning phase has always been very lackluster. So this buff to the Q where it now deals full damage to every single target and the proc damage is also a bit higher means that not only is your laning phase a bit better, but your poke in teamfights and when you're maybe sieging down towers or the enemy sieging down your towers is going to be much stronger until you find that one opportunity to finally go in. It also seems like AP champions are becoming much more popular to be played in the mid lane versus maybe some AD assassins. And I personally think rushing Abyssal Scepter is absolutely wonderful on her because the second you get it, you're going to be not only very tanky, you'll be doing a lot of damage and you can wave clear very easily. And on top of that, if your second item or maybe even your first item is Luden's Echo, well that's going to make your Q poke much more scarier. She's definitely one of those champions that's very deadly if she gets a little bit ahead or if you don't just flat out stop her in laning phase. She also has really good base damage in her ability, she has no mana in her kit, she can still proc Thunderlords very easily because her Q and her W will be Thunderlords right then and there. She has no true skill shots in her kit, which obviously makes her much easier to play, and her ultimate still does massive damage. So putting her in the number 2 spot maybe is a little bit of a risk, but I want to do it because I do want to highlight this champion. I do think she's quite strong. However, the cons is the fact that she has no CC in her kit while also being heavily countered by CC. And even though her laning phase is definitely better, it is still somewhat weak. But here are my recommended runes, masteries, items, and all that good stuff if you decide to play some of Katarina. And the number 1 spot, what a surprise, I mean no one expected this ever, is gonna be Zed. I promise you guys this is not me being biased. Zed, without question, if you ask almost anyone, is just flat out the strongest assassin at the moment. And that's probably why he has nerfs coming for him very soon. So let's talk a little bit about Zed. He's a powerhouse in the laning phase because he has the range on his W, he's got very heavy harass, he's got a lot of mobility and wave clear. Now granted, he doesn't have any hard CC and obviously for a good reason, but again he does have quite a bit to offer in the laning phase. So if you were to ask me, the main power spike, the main moment of the game where Zed is just at his peak is in the laning phase and the mid game. I've also been trying to rush Duskblade first followed by Youmu's after, and I have to say it's been working quite well for me. If you are a little bit ahead and you get the Duskblade first item, you are going to be getting the kill on the target almost every single time you have it up. Thunderlords only adds to his already decently high burst damage with his full combo in the laning phase. Again, he has high mobility. He forces champions to also rush items to counter him, so like a Zanya's, like a QSS. He's got plenty of outplay potential with his kit, whether it's dodging abilities with your W, your ultimate, or your ultimate's shadow. And I think we can all agree that a very good Zed can be very frustrating to play with just because of the amount of options he has in his kit. But having said that, because he has so many options in his kit and so many different things he can do, that's also what makes him very difficult. Playing him at the higher level or playing him against people of your skill level if not higher is not easy because you have to know which option of the many options is the correct one and will give you the best results, and you only have a split second to decide that. On top of this, Zed will be getting nerfs very soon apparently according to a Riot post, and I also made a video talking about this. I said his peak or his main just true power is in the laning phase and especially mid game. However, late game he does fall off by a little bit. And the main reason for that is because there's just so many ways to counter his ultimate, whether you're talking about champions or items or just both. So very late into the game is when he becomes extremely difficult to play, and when I truly think the real good Zed players are being separated from just the okay Zed players. But either way, Zed, without question in my mind, whether I main him or not, is the best assassin at the very moment. And here's everything you need to know in order to pick up Zed, bring him into a game, and hopefully do well with him. Now just before I end off this video, I want to give one honorable mention to one assassin champion. Echo. So he just recently got some buffs this patch, and even though they aren't the biggest thing in the world, I do feel like it's enough to maybe start looking back at this champion and being like, maybe he can be actually quite strong. Now, it's going to take a little bit more time to truly understand his power and whether or not he's really just back into the meta, especially in mid lane, so that's why I didn't include him in any of these numbers just yet, but I wanted to talk about him in the honorable mentions. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is the fact that I will be keeping an eye out on this champion, and maybe you'll see him in my next top 5 assassin list. But either way, guys, that is it for this video. Those are my current top 5 assassins, and I'll also be making a new top 5 AP mid champion list very soon. If there are any other top 5 lists that you want me to make, let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to hit that like button, and also share this with your friends, subscribe if you haven't, all of that good stuff. Here are my favorite comments from the previous video's question asking if you guys think solo queue is the way to go or dynamic queue is the way to go. But I thank each and every one of you for watching, and I'll see you for the next video. Peace.